racism is alive and well in churches. And when confronted with that, they have a really hard time dealing with it. I was giving a lesson to a high school group that I've been teaching for 6 years that happened to be 80% female and 80% people of color. And during my talk, integrating the story of the Atlanta shootings, the main leader tried to cut me off, saying that the discussion of the Atlanta shootings was inappropriate in a church setting and was irrelevant. As the leader of the organization, he said, "I've always wondered why you're more loyal to China than the United States." And he said, "As the leader of this organization, I never want you to teach on being Asian again." This leader said I was fired. I was out. Never, ever apologize for any of his racist actions or beliefs. The elders think I've taken this way too seriously. They've told me that I don't know what racism is, that these individuals don't hate Asians. That's their only definition of racism. I know exactly what laws have been broken, but they're not taking it seriously.
Jesse and I, just for context, we're not Christian. We lie on different ends of the spirituality spectrum. So we are coming more from a secular background when we're talking about all this. But you mentioned how on the surface, your church is incredibly diverse and seemingly supportive of the diverse community with all these languages and even accessibility avenues and the George Floyd thing. I don't know these people. I don't know which congregation you're talking about. To me, it feels like a lot of what's going on is like all the diversity support that they portray is more surface level and to kind of like win brownie points to be seen as supportive. But when it comes down to the way it's being taught, they actually prefer any cultural differences to be removed altogether from the way that the teachings are discussed. Is that fair?
I actually have a different perspective on that. I can see, coming from a secular background, that's how it would look. I think in my wife and my assessment, and again, my wife led a children's ministry under this group as well. We live in a city that has probably at this point exceeded 2/3 people of color. So South Asians like Indians or Pakistanis, and East Asians and other Asians. So I can see where if you're not educated in DE and I, and I've been at it since I was 16 years old, you would assume that minority only means in terms of population and numbers. And so therefore, when it comes to Asians, you can't possibly be racist because they're the majority. Not understanding that true power is in who's in control. So did the church invest in being branded as a multicultural church? Absolutely. Do they think that they're a multicultural church? Absolutely. Do they understand what racism is? No, I give them that maybe they didn't. Even people of color may not be aware. Or there's that whole term of being majority adjacent. In this role, I'm both a Christ follower, but I've been a corporate executive. I'm also very active in communities, people of color, and I do a lot of education. When I start to send them articles, faith-based and non-faith-based, about racism in the church, when I actually bring materials from the affiliation and their stance on racism, which actually stated that as the church continues to grow in America, the church, big C, it's like you have to recognize that the Black, Latinx, and Asian communities, while minorities as individual groups, will actually be cumulatively greater than the majority, and that the majority needs to go out of their way to make efforts to understand where they're coming from. We're all flawed human beings. We all have things we need to work on. None of us are perfect, and none of us are better than anybody else. The biggest part, thinking about what the church is doing, is that the leader, forget about the private conversation you have with me or pushing me out, in front of a group of students and parents on Zoom, specifically said that speaking on race is irrelevant, that there was no room for that to be even talked about. And the other leader who was writing notes to me saying that they and this leader felt that I was always off topic. Out in the open, they've stated these things. And so back to the civil rights attorney, clearly delineating what were violations of First Amendment rights. And so you don't get to hide behind your faith or a church or an organization to say that it's okay. And you also don't get to say that myself as a person of color, that I don't know what racism is.
I think that this is like a really great example of how pernicious racism really is, because I feel like if you asked a lot of Asian individuals, like the majority, what was going to happen to the Asian community during COVID, I don't think a lot of people would have said violent attacks. I think it's really easy for people to forget that they do feed into racism. Like, everybody's a little bit racist, according to the Avenue Q off-Broadway play. It's true. Everyone is. There's even inter-racism between people of color. Like, it's very well established that there's racism playing on everybody in all different settings. And so it's like really easy to forget what part that we all contribute to that. And this is just a really great example, because people will defer that responsibility. They'll say like, oh, I'm not racist. Like, I have Asian friends, I have Black friends, I contribute to this thing. But it's not about those things. It's like, what are you doing like actively every day to question yourself and say like, hey, did I do something wrong here? Like, did I say something offensive here? And I think that a lot of people don't want to do that, because it confronts a really ugly reality about themselves and about the people that they associate with.
Back to, we all have biases. And that was one of the responses the elders gave to me. And like, yeah, we do all have biases. Some people control it better than others, and some people don't let it out in the open. These individuals have had biases for over, many years that I've been working with them. The one who has a strained relationship with their child, when I first met them, they're like, we love Asians. And not that I asked for it. It's like, my child is socially awkward, but when they went to university, Asians are the only person that were kind to them. As the daughter's relationship got strained, now the family's blaming Asians for their strained relationship with their child. And so my pastor was like, have grace on them, you know what they're going through. The individual who said they apologized, his final words to me after he apologized for pushing me out was, you said you grew up in a white neighborhood. How come you've never done a lesson for white people? And my church didn't think that was racist. I'm like, that is inherently racist. Your show, Angela and JC, are called Where You Really From? The number one racist incident against Asians as people of color is not a violent attack, although violence is certainly in the news today. It is that we are automatically assumed as not belonging here in the United States. And when I say this directly, they think it's not a big deal, even with the people of color that are on the elder board. It's crazy. And that's another thing, is that my daughter was in the class. 3 students quit the program, and all of that just goes on deaf ears. They don't think that as a big deal. I think, because I'm an organizational behavior major, right? I didn't study STEM. So again, breaking a stereotype. Organizationally, doesn't matter what organization it is, you come out with your own culture and your own ways of handling things. I don't think that they're consciously understanding that they're promoting or propagating racist attitudes of belief. They're in protection mode, because even though my wife and I have been there 16 years, these other people who've been there just as long have closer ties and relationships.
What you were just saying about the power dynamics, I mean, it really speaks to what you were saying earlier about the differences between the definition of minority and a majority. It's not just even really being about the actual amount of people, and that's actually not how I've referred to it, speaking in that manner for quite some time. It's always been about the power. It's about who has the in, who never has to question where their place is in society. That is the majority. It's not really like just because they're more of a certain type of people, they are the majority. That's not really the case. And I think that's really well exemplified in the situation that you're going through of like, who has the power. I mean, you mentioned there are some people of color on the elder board and people of color in positions of power. So it's just like, it shows that you can be a minority in a majority acting against the interests of a minority. I think it's very convoluted mental gymnastics.